Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is the Center for Brooklyn History. We're really excited that you're all here. Just out of curiosity, who's been here, who has not been here before? Wow. Well, a special welcome to you all, and I hope that you're going to find other reasons to come back. There's lots of reasons. I am happy to talk to you about them at length, but that's not why we're here. But welcome to everybody. My name is Marcia Eli. I have the joy, really, of creating and offering the programs that we have here every week for free. I work with all of my colleagues here at the center, as well as at the Brooklyn Public Library, which we are part of now, and the Arts and Culture team BBL Presents. So tonight we're honored to welcome Noliwe Rooks, one of our country's most distinguished scholars of race and gender and how they are impacted by popular culture, social history, and political life in the United States. Her new book, Integrated: How American Schools Failed Black Children, questions the faith we put in Brown v. Board of Ed, and ultimately the value of integrated schools. While the landmark case solved for the problems of its times, with decades between then and now, Rooks sees that the solving itself created other problems, and her book examines with fresh eyes the impacts of integration. We're thrilled that Noliwe's conversation partner tonight is Sonya Douglass, founding director of the Black Education Research Center at Teachers College, and you'll hear more about both of them in a moment. But first, I want to share that Integrated is available at the CBH shop, which is in the corner over there where you came in. I also want to share that at the end of their discussion, we'll turn to you and your questions. Our ushers will bring a mic to you at your seat. I only ask that you keep your questions brief and try to resist long commentary. Short commentary is okay, but long commentary. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about tonight's distinguished guests. Noliwe Rooks is the L. Herbert Ballou University Professor of Africana Studies and the Chair of Africana Studies at Brown University. She studies the culture and racial implications of beauty, fashion, and adornment, race, capitalism, and education, and the urban politics of food and cannabis production. She is the author of 5 books and a regular contributor to outlets including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Chronicle of Higher Education, Time, and NPR. And Sonya Douglass is professor and vice chair of the Department of Organization and Leadership at Teachers College, Columbia University. She serves as founding director of the Black Education Research Center, which analyzes and conducts research focused on improving the educational experiences and outcomes of Black students in the U.S. and throughout the world. She has published 5 books also, including Learning in a Burning House, Inequality, Ideology, and Disintegration. So, without any further ado, please help me welcome Noliwe and Sonya to the stage. How's everybody? Yeah. I like a responsive audience. Is this on?
So I've been doing these things, and my voice is going. It's got this gravelly thing going on. So hopefully it's going to hold up. I've been using it more than I'm used to. I think it's kind of sexy personally, but don't know what others think. Thank y'all for coming out. It's a pretty day. I know you had options.
Good evening. We are so glad that you're here, especially to be in conversation with Noliwe Rooks and her new book, Integrated. Can we get some love on this project? I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and I hope that everyone will have the chance to read the book. And I'm just going to jump right in so that we can start the conversation. And I think what's so striking to me about the book is that it's part historical narrative, a synthesis of research, and you also weave in your own family story. And I'm just curious as to what kind of compelled you to write a book like this.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's funny. Sometimes I have these conversations and interviews, and people leave out my family. Like they leave out the humanity of the story. The reason that my family is there, I start with my grandparents, who were both educators in the South in Clearwater, Florida. And they were masterful educators. And I know it because growing up in Clearwater, people would stop them in the grocery store, out in the streets, and chit chat about their kids. Or thank them. My grandmother was a reading teacher. My grandfather was an administrator, he's principal of school, but taught political science. And so growing up, I knew them to be a valued part of this little Black community. Clearwater, Florida was not huge. And the Black community was not huge. There was the one elementary school, actually there was two, they built two elementary schools, one high school for Black people. And as I would read, I found myself often reading and thinking about integration stories or the history of Black education or various issues in Black education. And I realized I was always reading against my family history. I was always having to leave my family out and other Black people I knew out for the narrative to make sense. So the narrative, pretty generally around Brown v. Board, was that there was no Black education, or the education of Black people was so poor that the only thing that could fix it was dismantling what had been and moving to integrate. And it's not even that anyone really said that, like that, but the NAACP, I think, as a strategy, you can't say, these schools are sometimes great. We've got some teachers that are fabulous, and then say that we want to get rid of segregation and segregated schools completely. You need the narrative of failure in order to make the legal strategy make complete sense to everyone. But what I knew from my grandmother before she had a stroke and couldn't talk fully, which I waited too long to start trying to talk to her because she got to a point where you couldn't understand her. But what I knew from my father and my mother is though my grandparents had fought hard for integration, my grandfather was president of the NAACP, both of them worked with Southern educators across the South, across Florida, to try to bring about some kind of political equity around electoral politics, et cetera. My mother told me, and this would actually get to how they ended up in the book. My mother told me once, when I was kind of just chatting with her about my grandparents, she said, but your grandfather told me once, he asked me, in the middle of the whole Brown v. Board, it was just like right in the aftermath, and he said, daughter, I do not believe they're gonna love our children over there. And, like trying to make that make sense with the campaign, like how Black teachers who I knew they loved Black children, not just me, I knew they loved Black children because, as I've said, in public, parents and children made that clear, what it would have to mean for them to send Black children to a place. In Florida, at least, you knew, you were not confused that there was some milk of human kindness hiding under it was hand-to-hand, like Florida was unreconstructed. Florida is not new in the particular way that it thinks about Black education, Black people, the literature of Black people. To know that you are sending your babies someplace you don't think they're going to be safe, because you thought it would be best for them, and then having to watch what happened. One of the stories I tell is I desegregated a school in Florida in 1974 because the schools in Florida just got desegregated in 1972. Right, like the Klan, literal Ku Klux Klan, the headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan was in Clearwater, Florida, the world headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan was there. They waged war for 20 years, war, to keep it from happening. So that they had to, this thing they fought for, that there was this narrative that it was going to do all of this good. And then they had to watch all of the undoing. That made me want to start with them. And then I started thinking about the rest of my family. So my father, I know I'm talking a long time. She's going to get to ask another question. This is most of what you need to know.
This is good stuff. It's good.
Really, this is most of what you need to know about the book. My father had only ever gone to segregated black schools. His yearbooks tell this story that I wish my son had, right? In the 1940s, 1950s, I have all of the yearbooks, right? From before my father was born, after he was born, like they hoarded things. My grandparents hoarded things, and I had the good sense to get them. What you see are these black institutions where the janitor, the lunch ladies, all the administrators, all the teachers are black, and everybody's looking pretty joyful. There's chess clubs, astronomy clubs, political science, this. There are classes for returning veterans to teach them skills. There's driving clubs, and the kids on these parades, you know, marching through the streets, all happy, learning how to play instruments. And I'm looking at this going, I don't actually see today very many coherent kinds of educational organizations where you got just joyful black children being taught by committed black people. Like I struggle some outside of Atlanta, outside of some southern places, to come up with and reproduce what that must look like. My father then went to Howard, and then after Howard was recruited to the Golden Gate College of Law in San Francisco, where he met my mother. Look, it was the first time he'd ever had white teachers. It was the first time he'd ever had teachers that didn't think he was capable. It was the first time he had teachers who didn't fully think he was human. And so what happened in the classroom, my mother tells me, is, you know, he would answer the question. Professors call you, you know, call on you. You're supposed to answer the question. He would answer the questions. There was always not good enough, always not quite right, always can someone else help him? He's struggling. And my mother tells me how he would hear the white students rephrase what he had just said and be called brilliant. And it undid him. He was not equipped for it. He succumbed to drinking, which he had you know, had struggled with some. He was never, it undid him. Because he wasn't built for it. Because he didn't know that world. And my grandparents could build him for a black world that they knew. And they could build him to be the best at whatever. My father was brilliant. Like, he was a musician. He was an athlete. He played instruments. He, economist, philosopher. My father was brilliant until he hit those folks that he wasn't built for. Then my story, a little bit, I desegregated a school in the South, like I mentioned. And then the next year, my mother sent me to a high poverty school in San Francisco, California. My parents got divorced when I was 5, and their custody arrangement had me bouncing back and forth between San Francisco and Florida. I did 1 year one year in another. So I went from desegregating the Southern school to a hardcore black school with more police officers than teachers. With teachers, we would go weeks sometimes, there'd be no teachers, not even substitute teachers. We'd just be sort of chilling in the classroom, like doing whatever. The survival skills that I wasn't built for. I had not learned how to live. In a place where you can't walk down the halls, where the teachers are probably going. The only time I tried to hit a teacher was at that school, and it made sense to me at the time that I wanted to fight her. Like, the only time I ended up in a police car, involved with the criminal justice system at all, was because of that school. I had a friend who tried to teach me how to shoplift, and I was awful at it. And then was terrified I was going to tell my mother. what had happened. And then my son, who was raised in Princeton, New Jersey, had a completely different kind of upbringing. But in Princeton, New Jersey, he had to navigate people using the N-word with him regularly. Sometimes they were quoting the lyrics of songs, sometimes they were kidding, and sometimes they meant it. And he had to, but my husband and I we knew enough to teach him how to survive it so it would not destroy him the way that it destroyed my father. So the story it's a story of integration, the backlash to it, education in the United States, but the humanizing piece is me talking about what this looked like in my family. I'm not going to talk that much again, but see, now you know most of the important parts, so I can be succinct.
No, we came to hear you. We came to hear you. But you gave such a nice summary, an overview of kind of the different experiences that your father had, that you've had, and that your son had. And I just wonder, taken together, would you say that school desegregation has been an effective project?
So what the basic point that I'm making here is that integration or desegregation, if allowed to work, actually does a great thing. I am a product of the reason that I and others who are inhabiting the kind of spaces I inhabit get there. We all got the same story about busing, being gifted and talented at some point, having that one teacher that pulled you out who saw you and put you in a program. Like all of us sort of have that same kind of narrative. But that's like 20 to 25% of Black folks who share that kind of access, who share the story of public education or private of education really being an engine that changes your social circumstances. The other 70 to 75%, what I am talking about in the book is how the pitched resistance on the part of white parents, teachers, communities, politicians, pitched for various reasons against having Black children in their schools or in their classrooms, and if in their schools, in a track somewhere different from where the white and Asian children would be. So in Princeton, where I raised my son, there's one middle school, one high school. It was called the Princeton Plan, right? Princeton, in the 1940s, 1945, came up with this idea that how we're going to integrate schools is if we only have one middle school and only have one high school, it's a small town, like it's a town, it's done, no work to be done. Everyone will be integrated. Of course, the story that happens in Princeton happens all over the country, which is the tracking. And somehow, some children are tracked into these lower performing classrooms, like my son, who coming out of elementary school, is part of why the humanizing, coming out of elementary school, he was beloved. He had grown up in Princeton. He was an athlete too. He was the one Black friend any of his white friends had. He was the one. And he was fine, he was fine. But when he went to middle school, 6th grade, all of a sudden he ends up in the lower performing classroom, and he was coming home. I mean, he was like score. I don't even like test scores. I don't think they're good, but he was scoring in the 90th and 95th percentile on everything. And he's coming home like, I'm bored. It's not, we're just doing the worksheets. But he was in class with a bunch of other Black kids who were his friends for the first time. He had a whole cohort and crew, and he was thrilled with that. But he was not all that thrilled, with the work. And when I went to parent-teacher night, the teacher said, your kids, and we were all of color, like all of us sitting in that room were of color. Your kids are never going to be able to take the more rigorous college prep track. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean? What are you saying? He's 12. Why would he not be able to? Well, because starting here, like where he is placed here in the 6th grade, he won't be able to take physics or calculus. He will top out at geometry and something else, like for science. And rigorous, schools, the schools like the ones I teach at, they need them to take the most rigorous course of study, and they need calc. They're just not. So in the 6th grade, the placement had determined the kind of school, the kind of college that he'd be able to go to. And I am a college professor, and I didn't know. I didn't know that that's what was happening. I'm a college professor though, and I could wage holy hell. Like I was not like getting lawyers. I was like, I'm calling the press. I'm getting Cornel West, who's my colleague up here. He's going to come and speak to you all. I will be writing letters to my Congress people. Like, somebody is going to figure out how to get my kid out of here. But the trick bag there is, so I got my kid out of there, right? But what happens to everybody else's kids? And that's sort of the story of the book, right? If you are in a certain strata, in a certain place, you're okay. You're okay. Doesn't mean you never no sticks and stones, that it's just free and breezy, but you're okay. But there are a lot of folks who structurally are being kept from those dreams. They're being kept from people who believe, who love them. They won't love our children over there. I look at these kids in these classrooms and I'm like, I don't know what else to say to explain how it could be that we're looking at what we're looking at.
Yeah, I'm struck by what you're saying about the 20%, for example, of Black individuals who've been able to excel academically and therefore professionally. And I wonder how much of it is because you've kind of learned the ways of whiteness. And I wonder if you could maybe talk about that. I mean, you juxtapose that with your father's experience, but then the ability for your son to still be the only in the spaces that he was in. So how much of it is just learning?
Yeah, I talk about Jelani. My son's name is Jelani. I talk about Jelani as the only lonely, who had to learn. This is Paul Laurence Dunbar poem, We Wear the Mask. And when he was about, he must have been, I don't know, 12, 13, he was telling us, he didn't want to go somewhere. Like, he was invited somewhere, and he was like, he just didn't want to go. And we're like, why when you're social? You like people. I am a misanthrope. He is social. And so, like, why don't you want to go? And he said, I just don't feel like having to show up for them and smile today. I just don't feel like it just this one time. And, it's this thing that many of us actually do who end up in these places, this only lonely, because desegregation really was about, the line I use in the book is like, sprinkling Black children like pepper on popcorn in these white environments. So there's just a few. Like, in his honors AP track, he never had more than one Black boy. He might have had a Black girl, but once we got him out of the bad class and he was into the class where he was supposed to be, there were just no children of color. And by the time he got to high school, forget it. There was literally, it was him and a Latino boy and one other Black girl in that whole milieu out of whatever, a couple hundred children in that track. And I call it being the only lonely. And you have to, you can't not notice that there's something that's different, but still it's all you know. And you figure out how to navigate it. And it's not traumatic. It just is. Like, so with him, it's not that he was, beat down. This is not like the children who, you calling out the 101st Airborne to make sure they can even walk. The Little Rock Nine, they had to call out military to get them in the school. This is not like that, but much like me in my 5th grade desegregation experience, which I say, the Klan fought them, but by the time I walked in the school, it was just no problem. You just walked in the school. There was only one of me. I have my class picture. There was me, like as a Black child, but it wasn't, I was tolerated, perfectly tolerated. But what I learned that I could teach my son, and what my husband had learned, which he could participate in teaching, is who you have to be and how you have to move to not trouble the water. Like, you learn early that being disruptive to the culture, the community, the whatever it is, and you may not even think of it as being disruptive, you just being you, but troubling that water turns those kind eyes, those people who are looking at you kindly, who look like they want to help you, it does something else to them. And as a child, you learn like, okay, that is not what I want. They don't have to say a word. You see the light change in their eye. You see the little stiffening. You don't understand what it is. It's just you brought something into the community, into the classroom that they just don't want to deal with, don't know how to deal with. You learn how to navigate that. And if I hadn't learned that in the 5th grade, if Jelani hadn't learned that, we wouldn't have been able I couldn't operate at Brown University if I hadn't learned that, which doesn't mean I don't advocate for myself, that I don't speak up, it doesn't mean those things, but you learn that hidden kind of curriculum. That's what I think leads to our success, right? Like those of us who do it, you learn it early. And you know when to deploy it, and you know when you're not going to, and you can make choices about it. Whereas if nobody's ever taught you and you just think you're just there in the world to be you, to speak your truth regularly, be you, expect everyone to treat you the way, like you can run into difficulty. It's unfair, but you can. And we were able to teach him to survive. I was able to learn how to navigate it. We were able to teach him to survive, and again, ways my father just could not. There was no one to teach him that.
So many questions.
All right, but wait, talk about your integration story. So this don't have to be one way, or talk about like how you navigate these things.
Well, it's just interesting to hear you talk about it because, when you're living your life, you're just living your life. And so you're not necessarily thinking about the things that you've learned, the lessons that you've learned, the hidden curriculum. I was sharing with Noliwe that, I was part of a desegregation plan, which I didn't realize until I was an adult studying desegregation. But it was a 6th grade center plan. I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada. And basically, we have such a small Black population in the historic west side of Las Vegas. So the plan required the Black students who lived in the west side to be bused outside of their neighborhood for 11 out of their 12 years of schooling. So they went to kindergarten in the neighborhood and they were bused. And then myself, who lived in, I guess, what would be considered a white neighborhood, was bused into the historic west side for the 6th grade only. And so that was the desegregation plan. And, it's interesting because you make friendships, you connect with people during that year, and then you never see them again. And it seemed like such a long bus ride, but as I got older, I'm like, they just live down the street, But again, it's interesting because when you're going to school, I think we don't think about these things, kind of intellectually until you get older, and you wonder why you went to school in a certain place, and that's what really, made me interested in learning more about desegregation and just kind of this ongoing struggle for educational experiences for Black children that don't require all this navigation, I guess. And so I'm wondering, do you think that that's possible in the United States? Is it possible to create the conditions where Black students can just be free and learn and not have to worry about?
First, I want to tell you a story, because this is the story. It's not even in the book. I know you know this story. I'm going to tell them this story, which is about the dream versus the reality, about what was dreamt. And one of the things I talk about in the book is, at least initially, my grandfather and some other folks at that period across the South, it wasn't just him. He just stands in for other people as well. Their plan really was to have white teachers, the adults, switch schools first. To have white teachers go to Black schools, white teachers and administrators, janitors, go to white schools, and Black teachers, administrators, janitors go to white schools. Let the adults figure out how to interact, how to navigate, how to be used to each other, and then bring the children after. So for a group of many Black teachers, I won't say all, but many Black teachers, it was never their idea to just pick up children and send them into these classrooms that they didn't think were safe. They did not want anything like what happened to Ruby Bridges, who at 6 desegregates a school in New Orleans. And for the first year that she's there, she's in a classroom by herself. The white parents will not allow their children to be in the classroom with her. She is sitting in a classroom by herself with one teacher who went through some, people talk about how brave the teacher was. The teacher was just brave and wonderful to teach, Ruby for the year. It was the beginning of a year that baby sat in that room by herself. That kind of trauma that we're kind of like, that's heroism. That's what it takes. You are now a martyr. It denies the very humanity in a way. I think of Black kids, but the story I was going to tell you, so you get me start talking. So when the Supreme Court, y'all know Thurgood Marshall, and Thurgood Marshall dedicated decades of his life to desegregation and different educational lawsuits. First time he was in the Supreme Court had to do with teacher equalization pay. The first time he argued a case before the Supreme Court is because they were trying to equalize the pay for teachers, Black teachers in the South. And he had a great faith in the law, great faith in it. And Charles Hamilton Houston, Pauli Murray, Thurgood Marshall, the folks, the brain trust that came up with this strategy around Brown v. Board really believed that they had to do something that the Supreme Court would sanction, because as Thurgood Marshall said, we are a nation of laws. If the Supreme Court determines that this is what is to happen, there will be no resistance to it. And I think about, he was a principled man. He was a smart man. He wasn't like naive and dumb or like, he'd been in the South for some time as a lawyer. But he believed in this dream, this promise. It was like a couple weeks later, half of the Congress starts authoring documents calling themselves massive resistant and manifestos, and saying, we will, over our dead bodies, will you have Black children in the classroom with us? He got that moment so startlingly wrong, and then had to sit on the Supreme Court, and every case that was brought before him, every single one, went against the idea of Brown. Like what that must have done to him, and what that should teach us in this moment. About the faith that we have in the law in this moment in particular, where the law and those fundamental rights that we take for granted at this point are being undone. And we have a sitting Supreme Court justice, now I've gone off track, but I do want to say this. We have a sitting Supreme Court justice who said that all of the civil rights laws, 64, 65, 68, housing, voting, just basic, don't kill Black people willy-nilly, civil rights laws, he called them fruit of the poisonous tree. The poisonous tree, I want you to know, is the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, the Citizenship Amendment to the Constitution, a sitting Supreme Court justice who happened to be Black, but is still, happens to, sitting Supreme Court justice is saying that is poison, and that civil rights law is the fruit of it. We're in a moment we need to pay some attention. Is all that's going to. We're in a moment that we need to pay some attention. And we're in a moment where if we're going to survive educationally, we're going to have to understand what people did before these rights existed. Right? We had people who organized and built, who survived, who loved Black children before those laws. I mean, the 14th Amendment, sure, but those civil rights laws and protections didn't exist. And they figured out how to build and educate and keep safe and love. And we need a way of doing that. And that's what, if there's a hopeful, it's not a dark book. It's got a lot of real truth in history that you may or may not have heard.
Yeah, no, I think it's very inspiring as you speak about, again, the resistance and also the community building. The fact that Black educators have always been at the fore. You talk about teachers being organizers and activists and freedom fighters.
Yes.
And I think that is a part of a legacy that, if we learn anything from this moment, that we should be reclaiming. That, being a teacher right now is not just about teaching curriculum or about your pedagogy, but it's also about activism and making sure we're preparing the next generation for the fight that's present and that's, that's always
And that's really,
imminent.
that is really, I think, what I learned studying my family, what the light bulb that went off for me is that schools were as impactful as churches in terms of community spaces where organizing for Black freedom was taking place. We hear a lot about preachers and churches in the mid-century civil rights movement. In the run-up to that, before the schools were dismantled, it was schools. What was happening there? They were teaching citizenship. They were the teachers were strategizing. The ones in Florida had put a down payment on a property in Tallahassee, which is the state capital, because they were going to turn teachers into a lobbying arm. One of the things my grandfather and the man named Harry Moore, who's like the martyr, one of the first martyrs of the mid-century freedom movement, started an organization called the Progressive Voters League that took the 25,000 teachers in Florida and set up and wanted them to all join the NAACP, and then turn them into a group where they went to white politicians and said, so, it looks like you're going to lose this election, Mr. County Supervisor, sir. We have 25,000 teachers. We can swing this for you. What are you going to do for us? And one man said, I'm not going to do anything. You should just give me your vote because you should just give me your vote. And another man said, I will, what do you want? What would you like me to do? And they said, we want some anti-lynching legislation. We want equal pay. You do those things. We will swing things in your direction. So long story short, the man won by 2,500 votes. 25,000 votes had made a difference. And he did, in fact, white politician did, in fact, put forward anti-lynching bills, did, in fact, equalize pay in Florida. So these teachers, because they were teachers and wanted to make a world that Black people could live in, that the Black children they were teaching could live in, they wanted to remake the entire political structure. And I didn't have a narrative of teachers. My mind of teachers was, they taught you, they were strong and they taught you how to stand up and how to learn, and you learn, but they were teaching you to be freedom fighters. No, that was not what I understood. And that was my family history, and I didn't know it. So part of the book is sort of like, and that's not just my family is not extraordinary. I mean, they're extraordinary to me, but all across the South, these stories are reproduced about what it takes, what freedom looks like. And it's teachers in the South who were central to it.
Do you think we have what it takes now in this moment? As I think about, you write about racial violence. I mean, the KKK, the White Citizens Council, these very direct campaigns to destroy schools, to terrorize Black families and communities. And, I think about what we're all kind of confronted with now with the Trump administration policies and definitely the attacks on the Department of Education, and then just the words that we can use. Mm-hmm. What do you think that we have what it takes now in terms of sacrifice?
I don't, it's not even, I think we have the desire. I don't know that we have the infrastructure, the lessons, the history. I mean, what has been dismantled with gentrification and with the success of Black politicians who have often presided over a decline in Black life, but because they're Black politicians, Harold Washington is exempted from this, but many of the others, but many of the other Black politicians and mayors, you're watching them preside over a declension narrative. So all of the successes that we've had that we celebrate people like Sonya, myself, and others, right, who end up in these white spaces, operating at the highest levels with power. Well, we celebrate them because they're Black, not because they're impactful for Black people, the least of these, right? We just celebrate Black skin. Black skin should be there. Black skin should be here. You're not saying, we got 25,000 teachers, what are you gonna do for us? right? Not me personally, not what are you going to give me, what is my platform, what is my TV show, what is my, but what will you give us? And we sat around and thought about what it is we need. So it's not just what do you think? We as collectively have met and thought about what do we most need. We don't have that. I don't see that anymore. But rebuilding it, I think we'll have to start at a local level. And I see lots of energy around local levels. With people defining issues, taking stands, building. But so for so many of us, what we're focused on is the federal level, right? I mean, some of us are just sort of like, it has to be who we send into Congress, who we electing for president. Where the rebuilding that I think needs to happen has to start. It'd be like in block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood. I wrote a book last year about a woman named Mary McLeod Bethune, who during this period, she's in the nadir. Rayford Logan, a historian, talks about the Jim Crow era as the nadir, like the lowest point kind of in history. But from until now, like we're literally heading back. Like really, they're stripping everything that made that the nadir. We literally are watching that kind of come back. But these, and my grandparents knew Bethune, and they, because she's from Florida, and they were all working together. But one of the things that she did with her organization, the National Council of Negro Women, if you wanted to be a part of it, of the national, you wanted to have a chapter, you wanted to start a chapter, you first had to convene a group of Black women to talk about what are the issues in our neighborhood and community that we need to know. She called them citizenship schools, citizenship workshops. So she said, you have to start with, is it the stop sign? Is it something about a school? Is it like whatever it is that you feel we need? And then you need to identify the steps as a group, before you get membership, the steps we need to take to start to have that happen. And you need to find out who your representatives are and what their beliefs are. And then you come up with a strategy, right? Like, so before you can join the organization, you have to think about citizenship and civics and politics. I think rebuilding that, I really do, could be a start toward identifying groups of people first in your city, in the state, before we start jumping to, we're gonna have a Black woman president, because I don't know what country anybody is looking at that made sense. You'd have to build the capacity. I'm not saying it can't happen, but you'd have to build it. You have to work on it, and not from TV. You have to work on it in community. And I think we can do it. I just think we have to believe it's, something we want to do. I feel like we're almost out of time.
Are we?
Oh my God, it's going so fast. Wait, let me tell one thing I want to make
question
sure that
three.
y'all know, because I didn't know it before I read this book. So for Brown v. Before I wrote this book, for Brown v. Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, or Kansas coming out of Reconstruction, was a separate but equal state. So the way that all the southern states came up with different ways to tell Black people how they were going to be educated. But Kansas was like, you're not going to be educated with the white children, but we will educate you equally. And they, this wasn't widespread, actually did it. So all the schools in Kansas were as sturdy, well-funded. Teachers were paid equally. All of the materials were the same, literally to the penny. It was separate but equal. So when the NAACP first came to Kansas, they went to Wichita, and they said, like they had been looking for cases. They've been I found some up in Providence. They were trying to see if Providence schools could have been part of the Brown v. Board. So they went to Wichita, and they were like, we're going to take on segregation because the teachers and principals and politicians in Wichita literally ran the NAACP out of town. They were like, absolutely not our schools. These schools working just fine. We are paid well, everybody's happy, it's not broke. What are you trying to fix? So they went to Topeka, which had a different kind of social thing going on. And they were like, okay, so we're going to do it here. The black people in Topeka fought them for 10 years. 10 years. They collected money. They hired lawyers. They filed suit against the NAACP. Leave our schools alone. It's fine. It's not broken. But finally, the national office, it was just too much money and too much, they won. And we all know what ended up happening. As soon as the court case was decided, they closed Monroe Elementary, that even Linda Brown's mother, who the Brown v. Board is a little girl named Linda. Linda Brown's mother was interviewed about, wasn't it so great you got Linda out of this and the schools were dismantled? She was like, nobody hated Monroe Elementary. We loved Monroe Elementary. Those teachers were great. They made us feel like we could be somebody. It was like family. That was community. What are you talking about? No one wanted to get rid of Monroe Elementary. My husband and I worked, and we could not always drop her off at school. And there was a school across the street. And really, we just wanted them to make her go to the school across the street so that we didn't have transportation issues. No one actually wanted this. And after those schools were destroyed and Monroe Elementary was closed, no black teachers were hired in the Topeka School District, none. They came up with all manner of reason why you couldn't. You're going to scare the people. One woman said, my daughter has just started her period. She can't have a man in the classroom, a black man, my God. I don't even know the logic that she was employing there. But that man never worked another day as a teacher in Kansas because of it. So when I say that this is a trick bag, like that desegregation was a trick bag, integration works if people will allow it to work. But we have rarely had periods of time, including this one, where white people are pretty much have been, like, if you force me to do it, I don't want it. If I can come up with something on my own, if it's voluntary, we can try it. And then the voluntary thing does just not go, except for Metco. Metco is the only thing that is in Boston. They integrated the suburbs with kids from Boston, and it was a voluntary effort. It's still going on. It's the longest busing desegregation program. That has been okay, but it was voluntary. So it's not that integration doesn't work. That dream absolutely works. It's that the resistance to black children benefiting from it is so strong and it's so rooted. People bomb buses that children were either sitting on or were sitting idle that were going to take them where they were supposed to go. They threw dynamite at babies walking through the school. They threw acid in the faces of children trying to go to school. That's formidable resistance. It's formidable. And just sort of deciding that it's going to go away because the court says that it should has proved to be folly. And so that's what the book is really about, is about that resistance and what we can build in the meantime.
So in light of that resistance, which is just, continuing to increase even in the moment that we're in, what would you say is what do you anticipate might be the next generation of desegregation? When you think about your father's experience, your own, and your son's, what do you imagine it might be?
I should have something really great to say. I am at a loss. Things are declining so quickly. If you don't fix K-12, you've lost a generation of college students in many ways. If you undereducate children, which is what is happening all across the country, out in Oakland, where one of the places I claim is home, a few years ago, a study came out that said 75% of black boys were not reading at a proficient level. Proficient is 6th grade. So you have a bunch of, or for them, it's 6th grade, depends on what state you're in, what proficient is, but in California, it's about 6th grade reading. You have a generation of high school students who are reading at the 6th grade level. In Detroit, which I talk about, literacy rates are falling through the roof. I don't know. I can't see. We've allowed so much damage to be done at K-12. I can't see what's going to happen with college and at K-12 unless, again, we go back to if there are some people. Let me say, if there's some black people who actually like black children, because this is another fallacy that we have, that just because you have a black face, you actually like black people and black children. We are complex people like everybody else. We have likes and dislikes like everybody else. But there's this thing, oh, just get more black teachers. You have these images of black teachers from all these 90s movies where they're like walking the halls with bats beating on lockers, and yes, that's what we want. That's what we need. Like more of that. You brutalize them more. Like I don't think that man like black children. And we don't need more of that. So there's a real rebuilding that has to take place. But places that are working well, when you have adults organizing things educationally, that are really trying to see to a holistic view of who these children are and who they can be. There's small things. I talk about community schools as a model, which with proper funding, like that doesn't even always work, but as an idea, as a model where you have parents and you have a community that comes together to decide in that school how things should go, what the curriculum should be like, what is discipline going to be like, what is the day going to be like. But it's not just teachers, or it's a community. It comes out of the Black Panther Party's 10-point program, and it's named after the community school in East Oakland, was called Community School. And it's this idea of trying to reclaim some of the truly innovative educational practices that were a part of that. For one thing, they had, which I think is something worth bringing back, which is why I mentioned it, they had the idea of grouping children by ability groups instead of age. And so you could be 15, you could be 6. But if wherever your ability was, and taking the stigma out of that, that having it just be, we are a community of learners right here because this is where we are, and having people help each other. I think that's something worth thinking about. Instead of this kind of rote, you get this age, you have to go here. You get this age. What is to privilege learning acquisition, what you know, and have that be the basis. So the places that are experimenting in those ways, I'm very hopeful about. I'm very excited about in terms of a way to fix some of what's broken, but it's idiosyncratic right now. It's not widespread, but there is something. There is a model, and that's what we should focus on.
And I'm on it.
You're on it, okay. What are you doing? Tell us.
Well, just at the Black Education Research Center, we're really, committed to continuing to provide supports using research to inform Black education. So one of the things that we've just done is develop the first PK-12 Black Studies curriculum for New York City public schools. And so we're just excited about having, that foundational work there that teachers can take up and make sure that our students know who they are, where they come from, and are able, in civics education, right, and to be able to understand politics and how to leverage our political power in the ways that, our forefathers and mothers did. And I thank you for, you've given us, I think, some ideas in terms of Mary McLeod Bethune and her approach at the local level to help organize and I think rebuild a lot of the networks that were established by educators. So I'm hoping that everyone has heard the call and that we'll be able to work together to make that happen. We have some time for questions from the audience. So I'd like to, I've got a hand up here. If you could just, yes, she's ready.
Yes, this is, you speak in my heart here. Wanted to ask you if you could speak about two things. One, I did an ed law program at Indiana U, and one of the things that came up that I had never heard of before is this whole move to resegregation. You have places like St. George, Louisiana, where they redistrict so that they can really make, and it was really about segregating the schools. When they figure out they couldn't segregate the schools, they found another way around it. But I hear that's really big going across a lot of places in the States, and a lot of people don't know about that. So if you could speak about that, and then also speak about the difference between when you talk about integration, desegregation, where de facto versus de jure segregation, and how that really didn't. There were some areas like New York City still, when I came to New York City for the first time in all black area, all black schools. Can you speak a little bit about those two things, de facto segregation, de jure segregation, and resegregation?
So one of the big moves in the last 10, 15 years, not all across the country, it started in the South, But it is now picked up steam because the judiciary keeps sanctioning it. Is wealthy folks, and it's usually white and Asian. It doesn't have to be, but it is usually white and Asian folks decide to take their tax dollars and make their own school district. So they secede from the whatever the municipal school district is, because they're saying, like all the issues, right? I mean, we got these people we don't want to be, but their test scores are bad. If the school's overall test scores or the district's test scores are low, how will my child get to the college that they want to go to? Or there's social disorder. There's usually no social disorder, but they say there's social disorder. So they have all of these reasons, and they go before the judge, and it's basically taxpayer citizenship, which is this construct of if you are a taxpayer, your citizenship is somehow more robust, or if you pay more taxes. You're more robust and should be listened to. And so the judiciary, just keeps letting people set up new school districts with most of the money. And as it turns out, they just happen to generally be white and Asian. And then they're leaving behind poorly funded, majority Black, majority poor districts, which they then say, see, they don't want to learn. They can't, they're not capable. So that's the resegregation piece. It's huge right now. And then the difference between desegregation and integration, so in the South, it was in the 13 former slaveholding states, there were laws on the books of different kinds forbidding anybody to go to school with white children, basically. So it was just illegal. It was just not possible. Those are the states that Brown really took aim at because the laws were on the books. And they were sort of like, you cannot, as a sitting senator or a state constitution, have this kind of separate citizenship. After Brown was decided, of course, people were immediately like, well, let's go to the North. What is, there's no difference. There may not be the language in the constitutions and the charters, but all you got to do is use your eyes and look at the schools that something similar is happening. But northern states and western and all the other states basically said, but we never wrote that down. And Brown too, so they had to have a whole other Brown case because the first one was not producing any kind of results at all. And so they clarified that this only applies to the states where it's said in their official documents that there was segregation. But one of the largest civil rights marches in history, I think still maybe, was here in New York City and organized by Reverend, how do you say his name? Glamson? I'm sorry, say it. Glamson. I mess it up, I really should do. So I ask people to help me instead of butchering it again. So it was organized by him, and they staged a boycott and a march. 460,000 people marched through the streets in here in New York, demanding desegregation. And it looked like it was going to go somewhere. The desegregation was just some people in Staten Island going to a couple of schools. Like, it really was not that deep. It was not anything like you were seeing in the South. But a few weeks after that first march that got all this attention, a bunch of white mothers from Brooklyn marched across the Brooklyn Bridge, about 10,000 of them. Now there's 460,000 going, we would like, please, some desegregation, please. And then there's the 10,000 who are like, but my children, and we don't want them out of their neighborhood schools, and I don't want them bused, and our community will be destroyed. And of course, the powers that be backed up. And then they only wanted to send 45 children from, literally, it got down to, all right, let's just test this and send 45 children from Staten Island, not even touching your children, to some other schools, and that was rejected as well. So in the South, elsewhere, if you call it desegregation, if you call it not, and it's not actually true that it wasn't in anybody else's charter. I tell the story of San Francisco, where I'm from, which was absolutely in the 1840s and 1850s. you had people rising up. And it's not until 1971, long story short, we will not start back in the 1800s. I'm a half a historian, so I'm all like, the context is important. The 18th century matters. But long story short, it's not till 1971 that they actually, in San Francisco, California, that they actually get a workable desegregation plan. The first one involved children going to 2 different schools during a school year. Like, this was just so crazy. You walk to one and get bused to another. So you went to your neighborhood school for 6 months, and then you were bused to some other school somewhere else for 6 months. Of course, that lasted little, I mean, I don't think it made the year, and people lost their minds. You know, I mean, it's just not workable. So the idea of what was written or not really didn't matter. There are very, very few stories about seamless integration, about no integration or desegregation with no pushback, with no, that people are like, sure, it's the law, let's do that. There are some, but they're few. Like Ohio was pretty much like, let's do this.
I just want to thank you, one, for speaking. And then two, I'm reading this book by Charles Cobb, This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed. And so I wanted to know, in your research, did you find that there was a lot of armed Black resistance to getting kids into schools safely?
You mean the armed resistance on white people or Black people?
Like Black people, armed resistance to the white power.
So everybody in the South had guns, and there were, you know, but the thing that thing about this nonviolent stuff will get you killed. This is Charlie Cobb is a member of SNCC, and part of the 1964 Mississippi freedom struggle, where they instituted freedom schools, among other things. And when they first went down there, they were going to be nonviolent. It's a bunch of college kids from the North, primarily. Not a lot of them were Southern born. Baltimore being the most Southern, but not like Mississippi Delta. And they got down there and they're like, we are going to be nonviolent, and we are going to use, you know, we're going to shame them. We're going to make them hit us, and they will feel bad, and then they will change. And the sharecropper, the Fannie Lou Hamers, and all of the folks who were there were literally like, this nonviolent stuff gonna get y'all killed. Y'all better learn how to shoot a gun. Now, you don't want to be walking around in the street with a gun. They will shoot you. They will lynch you. You have to have some stealth about yourself. But you cannot just be out here like, I'm gonna stand unadorned and they're gonna feel bad about beating me in the head. That's not how it works down here. So the folks from SNCC talk about how, while they came with this kind of, we have come to save the day, they got a big education in how to navigate there. I don't know about a lot of armors. Again, the South being the South, the power structure was such that you really were not just walking around threatening, but on the stealth. Yeah, absolutely. I grew up learning how to shoot, you know, just because I was in the South by then. Everybody just seemed like they knew how to shoot in the South. In the back.
Good evening, everyone. To the point, I was actually going to talk about Charles Cobb for a second there. He, in an interview probably a decade ago, maybe less than that, talked about we need to return or revisit the freedom schools of that Freedom Summer in Mississippi. And perhaps the way in which we are right now in terms of what are the constraints that are eminent in our education system. What are your thoughts on that, one? And then two, in speaking about Reverend Gallamson, when there was the strike, he called, when the kids came into the churches and in the basements of community centers, he called it freedom schools. And so there was this kind of subversive way in which the community was moving in order to avert that. And some of them were being arrested. If you go back, if anyone gets a chance, go to the Schomburg Library and you could go through his papers and you could see the clippings of it. But there was a price that people were willing to pay as a community to take on the state and such. So do you foresee any of those things happening And is freedom schools, not the ones that we think about today, but the ones of 1964, do you see that as a possibility?
Sure. Here's something. What I'm sure most people know that right after Brown v. Board, Prince Edward's County in Virginia closed their school district for 5 years. Right? It's not an unknown story. But in that period of time after the Kennedy brothers got involved, they started a free school. They call it a free school. This is the 1950s. And it couldn't be supported with taxpayer dollars. But they got, donations and blah, blah, blah. And they put together a whole other curriculum. And they called to all the unemployed black teachers, who also got fired, school district closed, black teachers, had them craft a curriculum. And operated almost a parallel system that was doing pretty well until then the public schools came back online. And then they had to go in that, and they were a disaster. And so I get a little stuck on this free school, this idea of free school, which is not the same as public school, but if it's time, if we're still trying to reform, if we want to do this add-in, this kind of, what freedom schools were kind of an auxiliary educational structure for sharecroppers. Bob Moses, who was also a part of that struggle, called it sharecropper education. Like what these children were getting was not actual education, it was sharecropper education. And so they were doing a fill-in. That's one way. A parallel system is another way. And then I think back to, again, people like Carter G. Woodson, that period between the 20s and 40s, like before we had those civil rights acts, is the one that I'm drawn to most right now. Because these are people who came out of the Reconstruction period where they had rights. They could own things. They could be elected. It was only 8 years. It wasn't like you had generations getting used to this, but a new day seemed like it had come. And you had the federal government standing beside you. Those people know what it meant to lose that. And they built, and people like Carter G. Woodson, who they call the father of Black history, and Mary McLeod Bethune, a historian named J. Rogers, they had a fabulous idea. Now, this is a whole other book, sorry. But they had this fabulous idea of teaching Black children with what I would call comic books. And they self-published, a series of books that were everything about, be Black inventors. And it would go back to the continent and talk about what Black people had been. But again, if you were looking at it, you would say it's a comic book. But they started it because they said, we have to have stealthy ways, and teachers need a curriculum that they can use to shore up the character and the spirits of Black children. And if we're not teaching them about the inventors or the escapes to freedom, they had a whole thing about like, look, people were trying to escape slavery. They were putting themselves in boxes. They were like dressing up in different kinds of ways to get out. Look at all of the amazing ways that these people who these folks would tell you were slaves, happy to be slaves, thrilled to be slaves, didn't want to be anything but slaves, had never been anything but slaves. Let's have an entire series of the people who freed themselves. There's something about that too that I think we could go back to. Like, what do we want children to know besides how to read and write? We need that. They need that. They really. I am in no way denigrating that. Just talk about literacy rates. They need that. But the curriculum that Carter G. Woodson, Mary McLeod Bethune, J. Rogers saw themselves as putting together a curriculum that could survive in the segregated white supremacist South. So if somebody came in and you're reading a comic, but they're like, that's right, the blacks are reading comic books. I mean, of course, they don't want to read. They don't want to, you could withstand that. You could survive it. But they had an entire philosophy about getting to the psyches of black children by any means necessary. And there's pieces of that. There's pieces of what people have done that too many of us don't know, and we want to reinvent the wheel or say the wheel was never invented. The educational excellence and interventions that I know are not widely enough known. They're just not. People don't know what folks were doing to make sure that these kids could survive that. And again, we're at a period where we're going to teach our children how to survive some things they don't know are possible. Unless something changes, and hopefully something will change and this will not be the case. But the students I teach in college now, they don't have thick skin. They don't. They think they're citizens. I'm not saying anything about them. They think they're citizens.
They think they're part of the structure.
They think they're part of the structure. They think they have rights that white people must respect. Taney said in 1896, the black man has no rights that the white man is bound to respect. They believe they have rights that are people are bound to respect. We are going to a period where it is not in anybody's interest for them to continue to believe that. But I don't know who's supposed to teach them. I don't know how to do it. Like, I'm not saying like I've got it all figured out. But yes, freedom schools and all the other educational interventions that we know and don't know. We need them all right now. I think so long-winded.
Maybe one.
Like 3 people. Why don't we let a couple people ask and then we can just answer it one because we're running out of time.
I just wondered if you, in reconsidering integration, had any thoughts to share about homeschooling and school choice?
Sure. Okay, I will answer. Let's get some more people. I think you have one there, and one there, one at the back. Let's just get them all in, and I will try to be succinct, or you answer. That's probably better. We'll probably do better if you answer.
So much of what you said really resonated for me as somebody who grew up in Louisiana and went to school in the 70s. I was bused. I am neither black nor white. I was shocked. I was in middle school, bused to a school in a black neighborhood. It was so under-resourced compared to the neighborhood, to the elementary school I'd gone to, and ended up, once there were white families there, like they ended up like condemning whole buildings because they were falling apart. And then my high school, because they had a racial desegregation order, they made it single sex. The whole parish was single sex, that black boys and white girls couldn't be in the same school. But what my actual question is at the beginning when you said how there has to be a narrative of failure, in order that made me think about what the person behind me said, like how that's being used to justify things like quote unquote school choice and charter schools and all sorts of privatization schemes that I don't think does anybody any good. And just curious about your feelings about that.
Choice, there's one in the back and one here.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. I think, and I'll try to phrase this in a way that is not as jarring as it could be or sound. Do you feel as if we need to go back to segregation? I feel as if you've danced around the topic a bit. For Black kids today in 2025, do they need between K and 12 segregation in their education?
Okay, so then there's one more. I can do these fast right now.
My question really ties in with what they were raising over here about charter schools and whether you think charter schools offer anything to the future.
All right, so the charter school, the privatization piece, let me say, there's a move right now amongst charter schools, the privatized schools, to move away from college preparation. A lot of the charter chains now, because they have not had great success. Only about 30% of kids who actually end up going, only 30% go, and then not all of them graduate. And so over time, as a undifferentiated, like as a big, as the sector. And so now the thing is, we open new schools, we try college, people were dropping out, so now we think that it is far more important for our schools in this sector, charter school sector, to focus on workforce development. So my last book, or my last ed book, was this book called Cutting School Privatization, Segregation, and the End of Public Education, which was all about all about school choice and its history. And again, we go back to the 19th century again, because I really think history matters. But the largest sector, the growth sector in the ed field right now, last time I checked, was Black people and homeschooling. For a variety of reasons, because the schools are broke, and then in this new administration, though, the idea of government schools at all, coherent, organized schools, as we understand public schools, that's not the plan. Everything is, let's do vouchers. I mean, the big worry now is that they'll go to vouchers. They want to give, yes. So what? Yes, they want to give parents whatever amount of money you would get per year. I don't know what it is in New York. I don't know what the per student, per pupil thing is. But whatever that amount is, you just give that to parents. And you let parents make whatever determination about school. They can go to religious school, they can go to online school, go to traditional school. If you can take your little $20,000 and get into a private school, you can do that. So they want to get rid of all of it. None of this is in the best interest of Black children, is what I will say. Just straight, none of that. It looks good on paper. It makes sense intellectually, but the same things that I'm talking about with integration rear their heads in all of these other startup. But again, that's a different book. I don't think that we need to go back to segregation. What I'm saying is, if you look at many districts with high levels of Black people, they are in fact segregated. It's not going back to segregation. It's acknowledging the reality. What is it here? It's like New York City is the most segregated in the country.
But the population is increasingly non-white. I mean, overall in the country, and I don't think we take that into account.
Right.
So you have more people of color across the board. So of course you're going to have more majority.
Yeah, but it's not. So segregation does not have to mean undereducation, is what I think, and that's what community schools really. In a way, community schools are going back to separate but equal. They're just acknowledging that they want the schools to be in the neighborhood, giving housing segregation patterns. Many places, to have a neighborhood school is to have schools that are segregated by wealth, language, or race.
But why is it that we don't call the majority white schools segregated schools? I mean, they're everywhere.
But that is part of the segregation. Here's what I'll tell you really quickly. What I believe is that education, what it is it's caste making. I believe that's its real function. I believe that there's a way that it sticks people who are already at the top. It allows them to stay there. By giving them the schools and the access, and the stream just moves in a way that works that way. For people who start off at the bottom, increasingly, none of our sort of ideologies of education are about, let's help the least of these move up. You just don't hear it. Now you're hearing about merit. Well, if you go into underfunded school, like these are people, they've never been in these schools. It's not possible. I talk to admissions directors at places where I teach. It's just not possible for those children without deep intervention to compete with kids who are coming out of even public schools that are the top performing ones. It's just a different universe. So we have segregated schools, but we don't have a language or a program or a plan that's workable for actually educating kids in those schools. We say we have to integrate them. We have to take them out of their communities. We have to take them away from their families. We have to put them somewhere else for them to be educated. And I do think that there's a better way. I do not believe, though, in segregation. Somebody wrote a review about my book and was all like, she romanticizing the Jim Crow South and loves segregation. I do not. But we have, the schools are, in fact, overwhelmingly segregated. We need a narrative and a plan to address that. I think we're completely out of time.
I think they want you to sign books. So please show some love to Professor Noliwe Rooks. Thank you so much.